Dan Rubenstein, happy March, my
Hey.
friend. It is March already, if you can believe it. How are you, good sir?
I'm good because it's now March. I think spring break is at the end of the month. I think that's how it works here. And we'll head somewhere warm. So light at the end of the tunnel-ish. I'm feeling good, Ty. Baked some bread earlier. Life is all right.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about our bread. More about it on our bonus episodes, which we do at forballers.com on Thursdays. We won't belabor the point here on today's episode. As many of you are listening to this on Tuesday, March the 4th, going to have a State of the Union address here in the States a little bit later on today. Some of you out on Patreon may be listening a day early. Some may be listening a bit later. You may recall last year around this time, I wrote a full-on State of the College Football Union address.
I remember.
A full-on State of the Union address. I am not doing that this year.
No.
And the reason is not because we're worried about being, vaguely political or anything like that. Frankly, it's because I don't want to have to put on a shirt and tie again.
You look so handsome, though, Ty.
I work
Really
from home,
nailed it.
so I don't have to do that.
I know.
Screw that. I'm good with my athleisure, and I'm good with today's concept with Dan. We're calling it State of the States, yes?
State of the States. Yeah. We are just doing a vibe check, if that's a good way to put it. I think we're going to do a vibe check with a number of kind of randomly chosen schools that end in state. And I hope we prepped with the same ones that is on our list, because we've done that in the past. Okay, so it's Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa State, NC State, Fresno State. What am I missing here?
Arizona State, Oklahoma State. Did you say that?
Oklahoma State.
Yeah, we've got about 8 different teams here.
Yes.
From across all of college football that we're going to go through. And yeah, I think that's right. It's just a vibe check, man. Just a vibe check. Get a sense for where each of these programs is at in terms of their development, trajectory, as we've said now a couple times, vibe.
Yeah.
You name it. And look, these are not definitive answers. Again, it's March the 4th. As many of you are listening to this, things can change as we get a little bit deeper into the season. So we would, of course, encourage the Verballerhood to weigh in and let us know where we're right, where we're wrong, what you think, even if it's not your team.
Right.
If you've got opinions on any of these, 8 teams that we're going to go through, we'd love to hear it. solidverbal@gmail.com. You can hit us up on social media. Of course, Verballers.com is the Patreon. We've also got a Discord out there where people are always weighing in on our episodes. So,
by the way, the even though it was sort of randomly chosen, obviously there are other schools, Florida State, Kansas State, Boise State, right, that are obviously worth talking about. The swath of schools that I think we chose from represent, right, like Fresno State, new coach, Mississippi State, first-year coach, Iowa State, nice year up, Arizona State, surprisingly great, all things considered, Ohio State, national champion, Penn State almost in that national championship conversation. Oklahoma State, disaster falling off. Like, there are also NC State had big expectations, did not live up to that, to say the least. Like, I feel like there are a number of different directions that these states headed in, which hopefully makes it like a nice rounded out episode.
I got this sound, by the way. I'm not doing the full State of the Union address, but if we're doing State of the States, why not?
We can also talk about the short-lived cult classic MTV show, The State, which I think basically resulted in Wet Hot American Summer. Yeah. Nickel Ian Black, Ken Marino, Joe Latrulio.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm forgetting. Thomas Lennon, Reno 911. A lot of huge names in comedy coming out of MTV's The State. So if you wanted to go deep with that at the end, we can do that too. All right, where we start?
I'm going to list the 8 teams again that we're going to talk through here.
Go.
I want you to tell me which team to you represents the perfect midpoint.
Okay.
The midpoint. Which team is smack dab in the center, if we're thinking of this in terms of a spectrum?
Got it.
We've got Ohio State, Penn State, Arizona State. We've got Fresno State, NC State, Mississippi State, Oklahoma State, and Iowa State as our 8 teams.
It actually is more top heavy than I anticipated. It's probably NC State has at least the wiggle room to go in a couple of different directions. Does that make sense?
I was going to say Iowa State, but I think there's a case to be made for
Dude,
NC
Iowa
State.
State won 11 games last year.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the middle point.
Why don't we start with NC State? Because
Okay.
NC State, man, we talked NC State until we were blue in the face. We did a special NC State episode in the build to 2024. You and I were both crazy about NC State. We liked the roster. We liked the schedule. We liked the way it's set up for them. All the vibes that we were getting in the preseason was that things are pointed up and to the right.
Yes.
And then the season hit. And look, it did not help that Grayson McCall went down. That was an upsetting situation. But this is a team that just never got traction.
Dude, game 1, Western Carolina, I believe. Sluggish, unable to separate. Like, it was kind of clear from the jump that something was just off with NC State last year.
It was not a good campaign. Certainly worse, I think, if you compare based on preseason expectations. All told, this was a team that went 6-7, lost the bowl game, had the fight in the Military Bowl against East Carolina. 26-21, they lost that game. We are now trying to look forward, I guess, and get a sense for vibes at NC State. It's hard, I guess, to reboot the vibes on the heels of what we saw last year.
Right.
It's a lot of goodwill. You got to believe in a lot of goodwill on the Dave Doran side, I think, to fully reboot your vibe meter and feel like things are going in a better direction for NC State. You mentioned something to me on Slack before we hit the go button here about the quarterback situation at NC State and how there's a lot riding on that. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yes. I mean, for the most part last season, CJ Bailey was, and you know, the background on him, of course, is from South Florida, was Jeremiah Smith's high school quarterback, came in with Grayson McCall hurt, physically, you know, tall, gifted physically on the thin side, but showed enough flash and promise to be like, all right, this is definitely NC State's quarterback of the future. Had some low moments. The Georgia Tech game, even with his low moments, was super winnable for NC State. They just couldn't close that out. They had a lead late. But losing Casey Concepcion, losing a couple playmakers on defense, replacing both coordinators, both for good reason with Tony Gibson getting a head coaching job, and for less than good reasons with the offense struggling for stretches of last year, getting absolutely pulverized by Tennessee and Clemson in September. 2 playoff teams, to be fair, but they gave up like 115 points. This defense was nowhere near where it should have been last season. And not really having the confidence behind the scenes, it seems, to really hit the portal super hard after hitting it hard last season and coming up short with their results. And so it looks like, you know, 10 guys came in, 17 guys left, obviously headlined by Casey Concepcion. It's sort of a toss-up schedule this year. This is not a preview episode. This is not a recap episode, but I'm just trying to assess the vibes in Raleigh. And, you know, there's a lot of toss-up on this schedule. They got some tough road matches against, what is it? They're at Notre Dame. They're at Miami. They closed with North Carolina, of course. But even like last season, like, the North Carolina win is always going to be a good win. No matter the circumstance, you beat UNC, that's a good thing.
Sure.
But otherwise, in the ACC, they beat a bunch of Pac-12 teams. They beat Stanford and Cal. And so they had one, this is me kind of moving goalposts around, I understand. They had one traditional ACC win last season. That's not good enough for NC State. It's never good enough. They've largely been consistently pretty good. They were nowhere near that last year. And it's hard to see, unless CJ Bailey is like legit Heisman caliber, it's hard to see anything other than vibes being very little, if any, sort of good vibes right now with the Wolfpack.
I think it's a vibe of impatience, frankly.
Yeah.
I think if I were an NC State fan, that's how I would feel. I mean, what I was weighing as I was trying to go through NC State, and I did this for all the teams that we're going to talk about here today, I picked out one key question that I had. Not, again, to try and make this a preview episode or anything like that, but I think you put a perfect point on it. Does the optimism of having CJ Bailey back outweigh the pessimism of Casey Concepcion leaving, of
who was
losing,
at best inconsistent last year too.
At best inconsistent. Does it outweigh losing like half your defensive production from a year ago? Does it outweigh having that disappointment in 2024? It just seems like that's a lot to overcome, and we're putting it a lot on still a relatively green quarterback who certainly showed signs of promise. But I don't know. Like, I guess there's enough returning on offense. Bill Connolly has their returning production on offense at about 71%, which makes them top 20 in the nation, but it's sort of the opposite on defense, where they rank 72nd with what they have coming back. So yes, there is optimism around CJ Bailey. I get it. I watched him plenty. I think there's reason to be excited there, but it really is, to me, a question of impatience. Like, if last year was supposed to be the year, we're going to ask this question, by the way, about Oklahoma State in a little bit.
Sure.
If last year was supposed to be the year, if you're asking fans to kind of buy in a season where it seems like it's all there, injury notwithstanding, like, there is no way to frame what happened last year as anything other than a huge disappointment, and it's just not easy to come back from that. So I would say vibes are impatient. I would say vibes are somewhat optimistic given CJ Bailey's return, but if I'm ranking this on a scale from 1 to 10, I'd probably put it at about a 4.
Yeah, they didn't even protect CJ Bailey all that.
No.
So
not even close.
You're asking a lot right now. I don't know. They looked at defense as an area where they needed to hit the portal, and we'll see if that makes a difference and takes some of the load off of the offense to have to score 40, 45 points or something this season. And it's the ACC. You look at their schedule, other than the obvious talented, stronger teams in the conference, and Notre Dame, Miami, whoever. Yeah, could they beat Virginia? Sure. Could they beat Virginia Tech? Sure. Could there's teams on this where you're like, okay, could an NC State with their act together be okay? Absolutely. Right? There's a track record there for Dave Doran in this program. But when you're replacing coordinators, you're coming off of the season with the issues that they had, you're like, it's hard to find the vibes right now. But, maybe that's a galvanizing factor for this team that they're sort of into this offseason with something to prove.
NC State to you is the midpoint. I called out Iowa State. Iowa State's one of a handful of Big 12 teams that are going to be part of the conversation today. As you said, won a bunch of games a season ago. My question for Iowa State is whether or not there is actually that next step forward for Matt Campbell. I was high on Matt Campbell. I was high on Iowa State last season.
Right.
And I guess the frustrating part to me, as somebody who was really in on this team, truly in on this team, is despite all of that optimism, I still had it in the back of my head, in the pit of my stomach, that there was going to be a game like we saw a little later on in the year where it just is inexplicable and they lose.
Yes.
Has Matt Campbell evolved to the point where he can get those games out of his system, where the team is not going to have that to worry about? Now, they've got a lot coming back. They've got a fair amount coming back. Maybe not in terms of like the overall percentages that I know. Bill Connolly, by the way, on ESPN.com just wrote a big piece on this and put his graphs out there. And Iowa State's like 66th in terms of offense. They're 50th in terms of defense. But specifically on offense, like, there is enough coming back, enough of the playmakers coming back, that I think you got to feel pretty optimistic about what your chances are in Ames. It's just a question to me of, what is it going to take to get over the hump and not have those just like dumb losses in them,
I don't even think, look, so obviously the way that they lost to Texas Tech, I think it was a rainy day, a rainy night or whatever, and it was a close back and forth. The manner in which they lost was pretty surprising. But the team they lost to in Texas Tech, who, if I remember correctly, beat both Big 12 championship teams. This was a decent Texas Tech team. This was not an embarrassing loss because of opponent. They also lose to, I think, Kansas, when Kansas was on the way back up, and Kansas was taking care of business as they were expected to do. So they didn't lose to an embarrassing opponent last year. And even if they had been undefeated, they lose to Arizona State, just getting demolished. And that was, I think, an ASU team without their number one receiver, too. That's
right.
Jordan Tyson was
Tyson
out with collarbone injury, I want to say.
Right.
So this Iowa State team, by and large, found ways to win a lot of losable, closer games won comfortable games, beat Iowa on a last-second field goal, I think on the road.
Yep.
It was an overwhelmingly successful year for Iowa State, especially considering where Iowa State has been with or without Matt Campbell. You win 11. It's a weird bowl game with Cam Ward leaving at halftime.
Yeah, that
but
was
you can only play the game that's in front of you. And Iowa State won a losable game, and circumstances perhaps beyond their control, but it's better to win than not.
Look, and don't get me wrong, they did find their way through this crazy mishmash to make it into that Big 12 title game.
Yeah.
I don't mean to talk down on the Iowa State season from a year ago. As you said, won 11 games, a big deal. That was the best ever at Iowa State. Did not win the Big 12. I still felt like there was a little bit of meat on the bone. That's the source of my frustration. But
definitely,
this is obviously still a program that is in a pretty good spot. We know that their recruiting, let's say, strategy is focused more hyper locally. It's not exactly a national recruiting type of situation, but they are very, very much trying to develop the talent on hand and doing a pretty good job of it under Matt Campbell. So I think the vibe is somewhat energized. I think the vibe is, upbeat if you're an Iowa State fan, but you want more. You want more. You don't want to settle. It still feels like the Big 12 is gettable. We needed a season to figure out exactly how it was going to stack up. But if you're Iowa State right now, just knowing what you've got coming back, the playmakers coming back, and knowing what the conference looked like a year ago, you got to feel pretty strong about that.
I think so. I mean, look, they lose their top two receivers in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins.
Yeah.
And couldn't really run last year, which is always strange to me. It always, Iowa State feels like a program where they've had struggles finding receivers when they've had star power at running back, when they, David Montgomery or Breece Hall. Yes, that's Iowa State. And last year they had the receivers, they had the quarterback, and it was the running game and the inability to stop the run, which was really what held them back. If you go back and watch the Big 12 title game with Cam Scadaboo just filling up every single column he could.
Yeah.
That was, on the margins, because once again, it was at that point, a 10-win season. That is what held Iowa State back from fully realizing its ceiling. But I don't know how much you can complain about that. If Iowa State is out here putting themselves in position to win a power conference, it's an overwhelmingly successful year. And you're right. It's not like Arizona State won the Big 12 because they had stacked 3 incredible recruiting classes and they had such a talent advantage over everybody else in the conference. They closed games. They were well coached. They were great in high leverage moments, and it showed. And so they came to play. They were more prepared than Iowa State. They took advantage of Iowa State. And that's why we had the score we had. And so Iowa State is absolutely a program that can put itself in position to win this conference in the years moving forward, because they already have one of the conference's best coaches. And there is a sense of stability to Iowa State that I don't think is everywhere in this conference.
Well, it isn't. And that's the currency in the Big 12.
I have vibes as good to great.
Yeah, that's the currency in the Big 12 going into 25. Because as you look up and down this conference, there are a lot of teams in it now.
Mm-hmm.
How many of them do you think truly have some element of stability that you're willing to talk about in March? Doesn't mean they won't get there. But totally. I think Iowa State's one. We will talk about ASU. They're probably another. BYU is in that conversation. After that, it's getting late early, Dan. I mean, that's only 3 teams, right?
And by the way, Iowa State's schedule next year, Farmageddon in Ireland.
In Aviva Stadium, week 0, August the 23rd.
Eat at Bambino in Dublin, everybody, if you're going to that game. They have Iowa and Ames. It's a tough half of the schedule. They have BYU, ASU, and at TCU back to back to back. But I don't know. Those schools have Iowa State.
They have Iowa State. And look, back to the point I just made. Outside of those 3, Iowa State, Arizona State, BYU.
Yeah.
I think we feel decently about all 3 of those teams.
Yeah, they're in the top tier conversation in this.
Colorado.
So it's a great place to
Colorado, no idea what next year looks like. Baylor showed improvement. I think Baylor is poised to take a jump, but to confuse Baylor with like a stable setup at this point in time, they've been up and down the last 5 years. We have no idea what to expect out of Baylor. TCU, couldn't tell you. Texas Tech has definitely done a lot of work.
Well, they're the wild
in the
card.
portal. They're the wild card
because of what they've.
But again, if we're talking in terms of like stability that we're willing to speak to here in March, they ain't it. K-State, you can make the case for K-State. All right, we'll add a fourth team in there, K-State.
Sure.
But Kansas, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, Arizona, certainly not Oklahoma State, and Utah. Like, I don't know what to make of Utah. Those are only 4 teams. Sure. So
I know.
Which of those teams would you rather be than Iowa State? Not a whole lot of them. That's the answer.
I agree. So good to great. That's my vibe check. Where do you want to go next?
Why don't we stay in the Big 12, actually, and talk about ASU?
Okay.
Since we've been referencing the Sun Devils bunch here. Look, what else can I say? They won the conference.
Immaculate vibes.
Vibes. They went on a run. They won the conference. They found their quarterback of the future. Kenny Dillingham is there for the long haul. I don't think you have any real fears.
He's sticking around.
If you're an ASU fan, that he's going to ride off into the sunset and, take over somewhere else. He's at where he wants to be. He seems like he is the perfect modern coach in that he is good at identifying talent in the portal like Sam Leavitt. He is obviously able to rally the troops. He's young enough that he's not burning out from the new demands of being a coach in the year of our Lord 2025. The vibes are immaculate. And by the way, they almost won a playoff game. They almost won that playoff game. Yeah. It wasn't that far away from being an upset in favor of Arizona State, even though they were the higher seeded team. They weren't all that far away from knocking off Texas and moving on into the next round. So, I mean, the vibe is what? Buoyant. I'm trying to use different words.
Take your pick.
Buoyant.
No.
They've got a newfound swagger to them. If you're an ASU fan, you got to feel pretty damn good about this.
Can I give you a $5 word?
Always.
Effervescent. How about that?
Beautiful.
Effervescent vibes in Tempe. Yeah, Arizona State's in a great position. No Cam Scatabo moving forward, obviously, but Sam Leavitt, Jordan Tyson, one of the better returning duos in this conference, if not the country, at their best.
Let me ask you this. Here is my question about ASU, though. Okay.
I'm ready.
Last year, nobody saw him coming.
I mean, especially, I guess, Big 12 media picking them.
Big 12 media people were asleep at the wheel.
Yeah.
Nobody saw ASU coming last year. And we called it out. I mean, I'm not going to act like we're these soothsayers or anything here. What do we know? But like, we saw it coming about midway through the season. Like, this conference is in a blender, and ASU,
and they just kind of keep winning.
Kind of keeps like figuring it out, and it's not always pretty, but they're gaining some momentum here. Okay, they sneak up on everybody. They go to that title game. They win. They almost win a playoff game.
Yeah.
This year, they're going to have one of the highest returning production rates in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And given last year's...
Bring in Army's running back.
Army's running back. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kanye what a Udo? Cultural shift, by the way, going from West Point
we talked about that.
to Tempe, Arizona.
Yeah.
But last year, this year, completely different setup. Last year, nobody saw them coming. This year, they're going to be the toast of the town, the toast of the conference coming into the season. 18th in returning production, one of the highest rates in the country. This year, people will be gunning for Arizona State. It sometimes takes on a little bit of a different flavor when suddenly you're not the dark horse, when suddenly everybody's gunning for you. So is the increase in expectations going to make it harder for them to live up to those expectations? Does that make sense? Has the competition got their targets zeroed in on them, and is it going to catch up to ASU?
Yeah, all they really needed to do last year was show improvement. They didn't need to take over the conference to show a shift in, vibes in Tempe, and they won the whole thing. They won the Big 12. And so, yes, it's always different that you're going to get more teams best Saturday when you are the defending champ, and that you have a target on your back when you are coming in as the champ, and the champ beating, the runner-up in Iowa State by however many, 30 points or something. So, yeah, that's a little bit different. Also, this is, I don't know how much of a difference it makes, but it's the same thing, I guess, in baseball when your pitcher's going through the lineup like 3 times. You're like, all right, I have a sense for, or going through if you're a rookie hitter and you're having a sensational April and May, and then the league sort of catches up to you. You have more on tape, and seeing how your team stacks up against ASU this season. Arizona State is on the road at Mississippi State, who we'll talk about. They have Baylor on the road and TCU back-to-back. Utah, Texas Tech back-to-back with Utah on the road. They're in Ames, at Colorado, at altitude, and they have the rivalry game the week after that against Arizona, who is likely not going to be as bad as they were last year, but Arizona does lose their clear best
They lose their best player
in T-Mac. So there's something there. But ASU has another recruiting class. They have another portal class. They have Fresno's number 2 receiver coming in to fortify things. We mentioned the Army running back coming in. Wide receiver and offensive line were a priority in this recruiting class out of high school. And you're getting another year of experience under Sam Levitt's belt.
Yeah.
So, you have to contend with an ASU V 3.0 if you're any of those teams who now feel a little bit more confident in, getting ASU. So, no, it's fascinating. Arizona State seems to be, they should be considered to be the clear favorite in the Big 12 until proven otherwise. So, again, effervescent.
I think I screwed up my own returning production stat. I'm looking right at it. They are second nationally. Second nationally per Bill Connolly. 78% coming back on offense, which is 4th. 79% coming back on defense, which is 2nd.
Yes, and should be noted, pass rush has a ways to go consistently. Yes. And if they could get off the field a little bit more on third down, that would go a long ways. Hence why defense is a priority.
But look, vibes are good. I mean, some of these answers are easier than ever, or easier than others. And
yeah. And Hines Ward is on their sideline. I'd rather Hines Ward be wearing my team's polo than my opponent's.
Fair enough. Where do you want to go next?
Let's go to let's keep it natural and go Mississippi State. Since you just mentioned they're on ASU's schedule out of conference.
Other than asking if this team has a quarterback that we feel good about,
right?
I am.
Are we calling it the Chrome and Hope?
Chrome and Hope,
or is it shaping up to be a better season? Ty, it might be March, but I'm in mid-season form. I didn't deserve that much of a laugh. Like a polite giggle.
Other than Chrome and Hope or shaping up to be a whatever season. There's a lot of transfers on this team. So the obvious question is, how quickly can Jeff Lebby reboot Mississippi State, knowing that this is going to be, I don't want to call them cast-offs. I don't mean that. There are some good players, by the way, that they brought in. Our guy Fluff at running back is coming.
That's true. Fluff Bothwell.
Starkville. To Starkville, excuse me.
No, that's okay. Maybe we'll be calling it Starkwell by the end of the season.
Starkwell, yeah. How quickly can you reboot with all those transfers, I think, is the operative question. They were 2-10 a year ago. I don't think it was a drastic surprise. Frankly, they finished last in the SEC. They were 0-8 in conference. In terms of just record, one of the worst seasons that they've ever had. However, it felt like they played hard. There's a difference between a 2-10 where you feel completely limp, and then there's the 2-10 version that I think we saw at moments from Mississippi State where they actually did show a lot of fight. And it bums me out to no end that Michael Van Buren left and went to LSU, because I really liked Michael Van Buren.
Be a backup this season.
I really liked him a season ago. So I am struggling a little bit with where I place the vibes here on a scale of 1 to 10, because on one hand, we did see that fight, and that fight definitely extended to players beyond just Michael Van Buren, again, who I really, really liked. But on the same token, a lot of transfers. On the same token, still playing an SEC schedule. On the same token, is it Chrome and Hope? Is it shaping up to be another 2-10 season? Yeah. I'm having a hard time trying to put the number on this thing here.
So I have the vibes for Mississippi State at the moment listed as wary, but open to being surprised if I am representing the
I said gritty and still determined.
So this may have been the worst defense in America at times, or at least the worst pass rush and pass defense in America last season. There were no major coaching changes. You're right. They did give teams like Georgia and A&M and Ole Miss, obviously in the Egg Bowl, ASU, they gave them a little bit of fight. They gave them a little bit of a scare. 24 guys out, or 24 guys in, 26 guys out. So whatever they are this season, it's a different looking team. combined with, a recruiting class coming in. So you're talking about dozens upon dozens of new faces for Mississippi State this season. They've got a blue chip quarterback of the future. The schedule seems pretty impossible once again. They finish with at Florida, Texas, at Arkansas, Georgia, at Mizzou, and then a bye before the Egg Bowl. And that's not to mention Tennessee and at A&M in back-to-back weeks earlier on in the season. So we have to be talking about an offense that is consistently scoring 34, 35 points for this team to stand any chance, because it's hard to imagine them going from being atrocious trying to stop the pass to decent in a season without just an enormously successful portal class on defense coming in. And so, I think we are, as non-affiliated people, hopeful that Mississippi State wins more than one FBS game, which I believe was UMass last year. And, is chalking a team or three and showing a little bit of fight at the bottom to middle of the SEC. But I think it would shock a lot of Mississippi State fans if they went to a bowl.
Oh, for sure.
I think that would be pretty shocking to the people who should have the most hope because it is their team. But it is hard to squint and see 6 on this schedule at the moment. So, the vibes are, screw it, why not? But I don't know if that gets you to 6.
In terms of what they've got coming back on defense, 20th in returning production, but I think it speaks to one of Bill's other corollaries, which is that good? If you had a good defense a year ago, then that's great. But if the defense wasn't so hot, does it even matter that you're bringing those guys back? And plus, there is kind of this whole new calculation with how do you factor in transfers or transfers up and down this roster, to your point. So I just don't know. Like, I want to believe here. I really want to believe because we did see a little bit of that fight. It's just really hard to get momentum going when you're playing an SEC schedule.
Yeah, Blake Shapen started out the season pretty good. I mean, all things considered, they lose by 23, 24 points to Toledo, which is not great, obviously. But he had a good game against ASU, early season ASU. Hurt his, I believe, shoulder pretty early on in the season. So you're replacing an injured starting quarterback with a true freshman being thrust into an SEC schedule before any sort of warm-up. It's a lot to ask. And now losing key players on defense. I think they lost their best corner who transferred to Texas Tech, I want to say. You're just setting back the clock a little bit too much. You're relying on a Florida State backup. You're relying on Blake Shapen healing up and being one of the 7 best quarterbacks in the SEC. It's just a lot to ask right now. So, I think everybody's hoping for a surprise from this roster.
Let's go over to Fresno State, actually. Let's go out west.
Okay.
Fresno's interesting to me. Fresno's interesting. They're interesting because they had to deal with one of those time-honored traditions of the coach leaving very late in the cycle. We actually just saw something like that at Bowling Green. Different reasons, mind you, but Scott Loeffler going to be a coach now with the Philadelphia Eagles, be on that staff. 2 maniacs in the sidelines, him and Nick Sirianni. But it puts programs in a bind when you've got a coach that leaves so late in the cycle. And that's what they had to deal with last year. After months on end about whether or not Jeff Tedford was going to step away, it looked as if he was poised to stick around, and then he wasn't. And so it was always going to be a tough ask for Tim Skipper. This was a 6-7 team a year ago. They finished 4th in the Mountain West. They lost the bowl game to Northern Illinois 28-20, something like that.
73 overtimes.
So this is a season that definitely fell short of what we would say is otherwise fairly lofty expectations for this program, but I think it was understandable how they got there. So I think the vibe right now with a new coach now in Matt Entz is uncertain. This is a program in transition. On some level, they're rebooting. Like, you lose guys like Mikey Keene. I was never that high on Mikey Keene to begin with, but Mikey Keene at least gave them some element of stability. He's off to Michigan. You lose your running back to Boise State. You mentioned losing Jalen Moss to Arizona State. That doesn't help to lose some of those guys on the offensive side of the ball. They only returned 40% of their production. That's 116th in the nation, 36% on offense, 44% on defense. A lot of turnover with this roster. You combine that with needing to rebuild the coaching staff on top of rebuilding the roster. It's just, it's hard to feel too optimistic about this coming season.
Buddy, they rebuilt the coaching staff with what is considered to be one of the elite tight ends coach in the country. Pay no attention to his time as an offensive coordinator, Brian Ferentz.
That's right.
I'm not even saying that he's considered to be
very good.
One of the best tight end coaches of the modern era.
It's actually a very, very good hire. That's a very good hire.
I agree. Here's what I have down for the vibes. I have happy to hopefully be on solid ground with a new vision. So we go Tedford, DeBoer, back to Tedford, interim skipper.
Yeah.
And it's just like there's an uncertainty, obviously vibes very good when Tedford was rolling and operating and healthy and everything like that. Unfortunately, he had the health issues that he had. Kalen DeBoer was obviously a revelation, but is gone after a couple seasons. And so you're sort of jumping from lily pad to lily pad, and hopefully Matt Entz, with this being his first huge shot, obviously having the success he had at North Dakota State, that this is solid ground for Fresno moving forward. They're also a place that, like, if there is a major school on the West Coast that, is losing a transfer or whatever, that, a former 4-star, 5-star from Northern California, Southern Cal, like Fresno State is a meaningful landing spot, I think, considering its geography and still like a big enough size school that's going to play in big enough games to like get seen. Corey Foreman was like a former 5-star USC, and now he's getting playing time at Fresno. Like, there are those situations. Jake Haener at Washington comes down to Fresno and thrives. So I think the vibes are fine. I think he hired decently well. I think they're a good spot. They lost games that they should be semi-embarrassed to have lost last season. I think Air Force and Hawaii being the two big ones. But otherwise, they have opportunity to show out. And I don't know. We'll see it's a Joshua Wood, EJ Warner situation at quarterback. Right. They'll get better there. They just, by being Fresno, being located where they are, they'll land somebody that they can build around for a little while longer. I think Fresno people should be, by and large, in a good spot vibe wise. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think expectations are different than vibes, and I think
they
missed
should UNLV be this year, so there's that.
I think they should be different.
Yeah,
I don't know how high expectations should be, but I do agree with the sentiment that just getting a guy with like a different vision and, for better or worse, moving away from the whole Tedford era, which had, been a long time at Fresno, right? I guess split up a little bit, but like, I like the Matt Entz hire. I don't think it's a bad hire.
Yeah.
I like the success that we saw out of him at North Dakota State. How that translates to Fresno remains to be seen, but guy won 2 titles at North Dakota State.
Yeah.
So he's clearly had a taste of success. We've seen that translate in other ways across college football. Other coach, Chris
Kleiman has worked. Craig Bowl was largely average-ish at Wyoming, but I think his second or third year was very good. His final season was decent. He was like, all right, I'm out. Yeah. But yeah, I like the hire. He seems to be a well-respected coach. And by the way, sidebar here, because I mentioned UNLV. We have Dan Mullen.
Dan Mullen is back, yeah.
We have Dan Mullen. We have Rich Rod. We have Scott Frost. Usually I'm like not super hot and bothered by retready hires. I don't know. They're all kind of scratching me where I itch. I'm excited for it.
I am too. And I like the hire here with Matt Entz. I am going to stop short of making any kind of predictions. I just think with so much new, it's hard to really put your finger on what to expect out of this team. I know we have Fresno people that listen. I would love to actually hear their input on the hire. I talked to some of them that listen, and I think generally speaking, the vibes are good that they brought in Matt Entz, but remains to be seen. Obviously, we'll see what happens on the Saturday.
Yes, agree.
Let's go to the defending national champions, actually.
This one's, I think, largely pretty easy. We can probably get through this one pretty quickly, but it's worth talking about.
Is it easy?
Well, yeah, they lose $73 million worth of coordinator in Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles. They replace them with an internal-ish promotion in Brian Hartline. We'll see where the offense is actually being controlled from, if it's a Ryan Day play sheet or if it's Brian Hartline completely taking over. Matt Patricia taking over the defense is a decision. Defense being completely overhauled, essentially, with new defensive line, largely new linebackers, largely new secondary, although Iggy at corner and Caleb Downs obviously back in the secondary, and younger new quarterback, receivers intact, new running back room, new offensive line. One of the big headline offensive line transfers, getting the left tackle from Rice in. But I would say the vibes aren't as high as they are in Arizona State, in Columbus, because the expectation is national championship at Ohio State. They met that expectation, and they met it in the most disappointing possible way, which is losing to Michigan along the way. So you can't say the vibes are effervescent at Ohio State, because I don't think the vibes are ever effervescent at Ohio State. I think they're good. I think there are good vibes. I think things are working nicely. They have a quarterback of the future. They're recruiting great. Everything is going well. The Big Ten has more attention on it than ever, given the expansion, given, the TV properties, how much they're on network TV, how often they're playing at like 6 a.m. in the West Coast. But I think vibes are good, not perfect.
I'm curious to see how Ohio State deals with this level of turnover. And
yeah, same.
Look, they've been in this position before. This isn't like a new thing for Ohio State. They're in this position almost every year. They weren't last year because they went out and they made it a point to bring back most of the roster. But for the most part, this is not a new thing for Ryan Day, for the Buckeyes. They're going to have new pieces on both offense and defense. As you said, the two new coordinators. But winning a national title buys you a little bit of grace. It buys you a little bit of a wiggle room.
Yeah.
And for whatever stock you put in something like returning production, they're 92nd on offense, 103rd on defense. There are going to be a lot of new faces. It is hard to come away from this conversation feeling other than the vibe being immaculate. You just won the national championship. Now you got to beat Michigan. It'd be nice to win a title again. Obviously, Ohio State's going to be favored to get back to the playoff. I think all those things still stand. But on the heels of that Michigan loss back in late November, to come out and go through the playoff field the way that they did and win in the manner that they did, it's hard not to feel great about where things are headed. It's just always a bit of a jump to assume that a team is going to be top 5 caliber, since that's the expectation, knowing all that they have walking out the door. Like, they're going to have a new quarterback next year. I think it's going to be Julian Sayin. If you listen to players that are going to the NFL, they overwhelmingly seem to think that it's going to be Julian Sayin, that he's different, he's a special kind of talent, blah, blah, blah. You hear it a million times. But it seems like Julian Sayin might be the guy. They're obviously going to have a fair amount back at receiver, but new running backs. The line questions, I think, will still persist. They were there last year. Some losses on defense as well. So it's like, it's not a sure thing that this is going to be a top 5 caliber team. I think it's likely, but it's always a bit of a jump for me whenever you got that much walking out the door that it's just going to click again the next season. That being said, there is a track record for that happening at Ohio State. That said, I don't think we're penciling in any, at bare minimum, this is going to be a double-digit win team during the regular season. That's just what Ohio State stands for at this point.
Right. But if Ohio State is a double-digit winning team next year, that means that they are at least winning one of 3 of Michigan, Texas, and Penn State, opening the season against Texas. They miss Oregon during the regular season. I'm not sure who else they get and or miss if you have the schedule in front of you. But if they're 10-2 or 11-1 with that schedule, they're probably a top 5 team.
They would have to be. I mean, they've got Texas in week 1 at home in Ohio Stadium.
Yeah.
Which would be nice. Their next, I guess, projected ranked opponent, just going by what our friends at FBS Schedules have on their website, would be mid-October at number 13 Illinois. They're going to beat Illinois.
Yeah, there's a stretch in there where you could squint and see some troubles. I'm not saying squint and see losses, squint and see trouble.
They do go to Wisconsin. I don't know if.
Well, I have the stretches at Washington, Minnesota, at Illinois, back to back to back. I'm not saying losses. I'm saying travel across the country and have a weird body clock situation at Washington. Minnesota has a track record under PJ Fleck of either upsetting or keeping things closer with elite teams than they would be comfortable with. And then Illinois, of course, looks to be, as you mentioned, like a top 15 team.
This is just really spaced out well. It's really spaced out well.
Definitely is.
I mean, they've got some of the toughest games on this schedule at home, namely Texas, who again is going to be top 5 to enter the season. Penn State, also going to be top 5 going into the season. They do have Michigan on the road to close out the year. I don't know where Michigan will be at by end of the year, but that game is back in Ann Arbor now. And we know, as history being our guide, that will be a tight game. It just will. It'll be a close game.
You don't just get Mikey Keene and feel good
Man,
about
if they're
yourself.
playing Mikey Keene on November 29th, something's wrong.
I know. Well, they're either playing a Fresno State transfer or a true freshman.
Who, by that point in the season, is a little bit more evolved than just being a true freshman.
Have some work. Yeah, I agree. Ohio State still feels like a program as a whole that has come to define earthquake weather, where even when things are good, even when skies are clear, they're a little bit too clear. What's going to go wrong? How can this team disappoint its fan base in November, December, or January? How will that fan base react? When is it ever going to be enough? That's what is always around the corner in the universe of Ohio State, it seems. But this year, it was a national championship.
It was a national championship.
This year, it was a season in which they have the established Heisman, non-quarterback Heisman frontrunner.
Yeah.
And man, what a gilded time it is to be an Ohio State fan, where you have to wait all of like 4 months between one era-changing receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr. to Jeremiah Smith, and that's following Chris Olave and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Garrett Wilson. Like, life is pretty good.
By the way, did you see Will Howard's combine performance?
Did he not have a good combine? I don't pay a lot of attention.
I'm not sure he completed a pass, Dan.
Really?
It was not a good showing from Will Howard. I presume he will have another chance on Pro Day to throw and try to up his draft stock, but some of the pundits, let's say, on social media were not too kind to our friend Will Howard.
By the way, Ohio State also adds C.J. Donaldson, who showed a lot of promise early in his career, running back at West Virginia, to that backfield, and an all-time great 5-star quarterback name in Tavian St. Clair. Great. Things are good.
Things are great. Let's keep it in the Big Ten. Let's go Penn State now. Okay.
Floor is yours.
Here is the question. There is one question.
Yeah.
One question only about Penn State.
Yeah.
And though I don't think it affects the vibes right now, I think it is very much going to be something in the backs of Penn Staters' minds. I think I said that right.
I think so.
All season long. And that is, what happens if Penn State crashes out?
Oh, wow. That's the question?
Yeah, it's dark.
I don't. How's that even possible?
What happens if they crash out?
What does that mean? How do you define that?
How do I define that? Penn State brings back Drew Aller. They bring back both Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. I don't have to sit here and list all of the other guys coming back. There are a lot of them that decide they want to stick around.
On defense is the huge name, yeah.
A bunch of them wanted to stick around and try and make this a thing in 2025. They are losing their best player on either side of the ball. They lose Abdul Carter, might be the first overall pick. They're losing Tyler Warren, their tight end, who might be a top 10 pick.
Yes.
Okay. There's a lot to be, I think, excited about with this team coming back, but we can't be excited about that roster without also being mindful of what is walking out the door. The ingredients are there for a deeper playoff run out of Penn State this year. Everything is set up for them. We can talk through the schedule in a moment, but the reason I bring up that question is because that's the conversation that I've been having with friends. I've heard it mentioned elsewhere. This is very much the season for James Franklin. where it feels a little bit of do or die. I'm not saying he should be fired. I'm not saying he should resign. I'm not saying anything dramatic. But just in terms of what it feels like to be a fan of the team, if we go an entire offseason talking up the roster that is coming back 14th in returning production on offense, obviously they took a step forward on offense last year. I think Drew Aller got better.
Yeah.
What if it doesn't happen for him this year? So, like, vibes are good. I think vibes are very optimistic going into 2025. But what are the vibes going to be like if they get into another situation like they were in against Notre Dame, which, by the way, was a very winnable game?
I agree.
There were a couple key plays that tilted that one in favor of the Irish. But
there were various moments where they almost completed a pass to a receiver. Penn State.
Various moments.
Various moments. Look it up. Look it up. Fact check me.
But that was a winnable game. Yeah. I think we'd agree on that.
Agree. I do.
It was a very winnable game. If they get to a point like that again and they do not pull through, what does that do for vibes? Because then Drew Aller's gone. Then you've got most of your offense gone. It's just a totally different conversation than I think the one we're going to have going into 2025. And that is very interesting to me. That sharp contrast, I think, is really, really interesting of what it could be or where it could go.
Right.
That's the reason I bring it up here. I think generally vibes are good. I would say, though, if we zoom in a little bit more, vibes with respect to the offense outside of the running game are a little bit shakier territory.
Right.
Drew Aller got better, but Drew Aller had a tendency in some of the higher leverage moments to run a little hot or going kind of to panic mode. You can see it on his face that he wants to win, but he's pressing a little bit. He did down the stretch against Notre Dame. That's why he threw an interception instead of dirting that ball over the middle. Who's he throwing to? I don't know. I still don't know. That's like the $64 million question. This coming season, it's a receiver room that is a huge question mark going into this year. They're going to need more than just that ground game if they want to take that step forward in the playoff. So, upbeat, yes. Optimistic, yes. Obviously, cause for pause with respect to the offense. I think we have a fair amount of excitement around the defense with what it could be under Jim Knowles. That I would expect is going to maintain its level of excellence that we've seen over the last decade now at Penn State.
Right.
Questions aren't there. Questions aren't with the Andy Kotelnicki system. Questions are, who's Drew Aller throwing to? Questions are, does this team have enough grit in its belly to take a step forward? And, can James Franklin get over that proverbial hump?
Yeah, it's if you or I give Penn State's head coach a nickname of January James, is that a compliment or is that an insult?
Exactly.
Is that a compliment that we're calling him January James because of what happened again? Or is it that we're so impressed with the step that they took forward that we're anointing him as January James? Now, receiver does not seem like it's gotten better.
It hasn't.
They added like USC's fourth best receiver and lost two of their better receivers in a year that those guys didn't make a difference late. I think it's Omari Evans and Harrison Wallace.
Yeah.
They lose the best tight end in the country and the best edge rusher in the country. I'm sure the replacements are more than adequate. I'm sure the replacements are going to be full on good.
They'll be fine. I'm not that worried about that.
But then we're also talking about a Penn State season in which they host Oregon early and they travel to Columbus, which, if memory serves, if you look at James Franklin's tenure, that makes the game at Kinnick must win if they're going to make the playoff. Or the game at Michigan State must win if they're going to make the playoff.
The games on this schedule in 2025 that jump off the page, September 27th in Beaver Stadium against your Oregon Ducks. By the way, I don't know if you want to go to that one, but if you want to, you have a place to stay. We can drive up. That'd be fun. But yeah, you go a little bit deeper into the season. You get to October 18th on the road in Kinnick, a week before a bye, which is a week before another road game at Ohio State, which, by the way, the following week, they're at home against Indiana.
Yeah.
And then the following week after that, they're on the road at Michigan State.
Yeah. It's tough.
There's a little bit of a gauntlet situation going on there. There's also a road trip out to UCLA before a trip back home against Northwestern, before another trip to Iowa. So there's a lot of back and forth travel here. doesn't make me too excited. But all things being said, like, this is a team that should win. They should win 10 games. Man. At a minimum, with what they have coming back, they should win 10 games.
I'm already excited for DDS getting no holding calls and being reminded as such. I'm pre-excited for that. Yeah, I mean, if Penn State, look, if you look at the teams that we're considering to be national championship caliber, whatever that grouping is in this moment, if it's Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, take Clemson, take your pick. Teams that are playoff adjacent, whatever. Most of them, like an overwhelming majority of them, are starting a new full-time quarterback. Penn State is ahead now. I don't know if that matters by like week 7 or 8. It may matter by the time they play Oregon, that just Drew Aller at home is just in a much more advantaged position than what we presume to be Dante Moore traveling across the country. But Penn State is starting ahead of most of those schools just in terms of experience.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And look, Aller took a step forward last year. He did. He got better.
Sure.
He absolutely got better. Some key moments he could have done better.
Yeah.
But I think the general story of the season is that Drew Aller got better. There was some smoke, as you know, down the stretch that like maybe Aller is actually going to go pro. He said he's coming back, but maybe he should go pro because of the quarterback depth going pro this coming draft cycle.
Sure.
He didn't. Obviously, the game that we saw against Notre Dame was not doing him any favors in that regard. But is he going to have a receiver core that can get open? I don't know.
I have vibes as on edge. That there's reason to be on the edge of your seat in a good way, and there are reasons to be on edge about this being a 10-2 into the playoff, maybe not in the Big Ten championship game, and then some new team. We've seen it from Oregon. We've seen it from Washington. We've seen it from USC. We've seen it from Ole Miss, exposing this Penn State defense in the postseason. And so who is that team going to be this year, or who is Penn State going to be this year? So I have it both ways on edge. Edge of your seat because it could be great. Edge of your seat because you're waiting for something to go wrong.
Let's close out this episode talking about Oklahoma State, Dan.
Please. America's team.
No, they're not.
Todd Grantham, Doug Meacham, Mike Gundy, quarterback with a very long first name that I'm positive I'll get correct by August. What's not to love?
I messaged you
a lot.
Yeah, I messaged you on Slack before we hit go, and I am reminded of that scene from, is it Major League 2? I should know this.
Yeah.
Where the fans are reading off the roster, reading off the starting lineup, and one says to another, who these effing guys?
Yeah.
Go and look at this depth chart. Go and look at it. 124th returning production on offense. It's better on defense, 57th, for whatever that's worth to you. But go and look at this offense right now with what they have coming back.
It's not much.
It isn't. It isn't. And you say this, we say this on the heels of a season where they went 3-9. They won their first 3, lost their last 9. Close out their season losing by 52. Didn't put up a single point against Colorado. This is a bad year. This is a really bad year. So I look ahead and I say, what are we hanging our hats on here? Where is the reason? Point that out to me. What is the reason to think that'll get better? Other than the fact that it can't get worse. Right. What are we hanging our hat on here? In a season, by the way, that was mired with some degree of turmoil with Mike Gundy and the contract situation where they wanted him to take a pay cut. There may have been an ultimatum, and ultimately he agrees to it, but what am I hanging my hat on here?
Some sort of mysteriously successful year for Oklahoma State in a wide open conference and new players, transfers stepping up out of nowhere because, typically speaking, and I say this because I know it's from a previous era, Oklahoma State had been a program for a long time that when you look at receiver, especially offensive skill talent, we were like, man, this number 3 dude from last year really popped, and he's going to be the number 1 receiver this year. And I can't wait to watch Tylan Wallace or whoever, the next Junkyard Jim Washington. Yeah. Take your pick. Yeah. that there was such good receiver recruiting and running back development, and everybody's gone on this coaching staff other than Mike Gundy and maybe the special teams coach, I believe. So he had to overhaul everything. And so now it's who exactly, I mean, it's Gundy's team, it's Gundy's identity, it's Gundy's choice to get rid of everybody or to hire who he's hiring. And they go 0-9 last year. And I just have been under the impression in the back of my head, like this would be a program to do what Texas Tech did in the portal. That you think about the money behind the scenes, the estate of Boone Pickens, however involved they are. That, like, say what you will about Oklahoma State, but there's money there in Stillwater behind this athletic department.
Yeah.
And they're losing much more to the portal and have recently lost more to the portal of note than they're gaining of note. And so it's hard to squint and see. It really is. You're right about who are these guys that they're going to be able to assemble this in a few months to suddenly become what I assume their goal is to be a bowl team this year, that they've hired well, that they've found the combination of guys. I don't know how you can be the coach at Oklahoma State and shoot for anything lower than a bowl.
I mean, Oklahoma State is another program that we dedicated an episode to.
Yeah.
In the preseason last year. We had Scott Wright on from the Oklahoma, and it was a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we put the question to him where we said, is it now or never for Gundy? You know, Gundy's been there forever. He's only won one conference title. Doesn't mean he hasn't had good teams. He has. But it's been a minute. It's been a minute since they actually had a trophy to put in the case. And his sentiment was overwhelmingly, yeah, that's kind of how it feels. You know, there's a ton of returning production. It seems like the schedule is set up well. This is a conference that nobody knows what to expect out of it. By the way, it played out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was Scott's impression, that it's either going to be this year or it's
Dunzo.
Maybe not at all. There is some level of impatience. And the other question that we put to him, especially because of conference realignment, was how much was it just Oklahoma standing in Oklahoma State's way, as opposed to Mike Gundy or Oklahoma State or the way that they're building the roster standing in the way of success. It was so bad last year, I don't know if we have an answer to that question yet.
And that's coming off of a Big 12 title appearance.
Absolutely. It was so bad last year that I don't know if we can even answer the question. So vibes aren't good.
No.
There's no way you can spin what happened last year and put a happy face on it. You just can't. I don't know. I mean, they wanted him out. Somebody wanted him out. They forced him to a decision. Mike Gundy is now coming back, but there's a lot walking out the door. I don't know who half the guys are on this roster. I'm not even going to pretend and act like I do.
Right. They've got Sam Jackson coming in.
Great.
Fourth school. TCU to Cal to Auburn to Oklahoma State.
I guess Zane Flores will be healthy. I mean, it sucks that he went down in October of a year ago and needed a season-ending surgery. But, like, unless there are these guys that just come out of nowhere and propel this team into a different stratosphere than we saw this past season, I just get rid of Gundy, man. Like, bring some
$15 million to buy him out, I believe, any of these next 3 seasons. He will be involved with fundraising and the succession plan, if that's the case. That's part of the new deal, figuring out who his replacement is. They had bad defensive injuries last year.
Do you even trust him with that?
I trust that unless things have soured to a crazy extent behind the scenes, that he wants the best for his alma mater. Yeah, that he could shift into some sort of emeritus role, like we've seen from a lot of coaches, especially if they have deep connection to where they're coaching. Sure.
It's just like it's been a minute since Gundy hired an assistant that I felt great about. They tried the Brian Nardo experience on defense. That didn't work.
No.
It was a risky proposition. It didn't work.
When they made the move to internally hire Casey Dunn, the receivers coach, to offensive coordinator, I was like, who are you competing against?
Right.
To hire him to, as your coordinator? That's the question.
That's why I asked the question. Do you?
I know. I'm with you.
Do you trust that he's going to be the guy to name the successor?
I think he's involved. I don't think it's his decision only. So yeah, I trust him to have the best of Oklahoma State in mind. I don't know, man. Alan Bowman was benched last year in the middle of October. Like, everything's just, I have down here, by the way, vibes of, it's a cocktail of shaky, desperate, and sure, why not? Sure, why not? Let's win. Like, they have Autzen Stadium in week 2 in Oregon.
I know it's easy to second guess. It's always, especially two idiots like us, sitting in our basements behind a microphone wearing athleisure. I don't think this.
I'm wearing chinos right now,
I'm
Ty.
not.
I am dedicated to feeling business.
This is why I committed to working from
record.
home. I'm not wearing that stuff.
By the way, it should be noted, in the event, right? In the event of crash, in the event that Oklahoma State is fine, they're not good, but they're fine. That their act is together at enough positions that they're fine.
Which they probably will be.
If they are fine, their Big 12 schedule is not the worst.
Oh boy,
there's no TCU, there's no Colorado, there's no Arizona State, there's no BYU. I'm not saying, Ty, I'm saying they could be a bad team with an average record because of their schedule.
Man, you're not wrong.
Look at the schedule. I'm not wrong.
I'm looking at it right now. This is what you want.
Those 4 teams are not on the schedule.
This is what you want, right?
No TCU, Colorado, ASU, BYU. I think I got that
It toughens
correct.
up. November gets tough.
It's a backloaded schedule for sure. Yeah, there's that.
What I was going to say is I don't think they should have brought Gundy back, but that's not my decision to make.
No, I think that's
they should have
probably
brought him back. I understand why they would. It's anytime you've had a coach who's been that successful and has been there that long, especially an alum, like that's a tough decision to make. I don't envy being the one to have to make it.
Well, they also weren't going into last season unless he had indicated that he was thinking of retiring. They probably didn't go into 2024 thinking this is likely it for him. Let's start back channeling and figuring out which coordinators, which smaller head coaches, whoever have interest in this job. Though that may have been the case in November that they started back channeling and they're like, we don't think that so-and-so or what's his name is an adequate enough obvious improvement to pay this buyout. So we will start putting out the feelers now, thinking this might be his last season, and let it be known that we're looking for somebody new potentially if Gundy doesn't work out this year. Then you're sort of fishing in a bigger pond.
Oh yeah,
as for interest. So maybe that's the difference.
Hey, they thought they were going to the Big 12 title game. I thought they were going to the Big 12 title game. They at least thought they were going to be in that conversation. Never happened. Lost every game in conference last year. Just crazy.
Correct. Yep.
All right, weigh in. solidverbal@gmail.com. Hit us up on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Where are we right?
Have you seen Wet Hot American Summer, by the way?
What's that?
Have you seen Wet Hot American Summer? Just speaking of the state.
No, actually.
Oh, man. Amy Poehler.
No, I haven't. I've heard of it. Obviously, I've heard of it. But no, I don't.
Michael Ian Black. Like, there's just, if you like those types, it's so good.
I have to check that out.
It's really, really good. Paul Rudd is in it. It's weird, but it's super funny. And it's, people from the state. So that's all.
Why don't we leave it there? Again, solidverbal@gmail.com is the email if you want to leave us a comment. Let us know your thoughts on what we had to say. There are also plenty of platforms out there now where you can comment directly on this episode. You know, it works that way. We post our episodes out on YouTube, but you could do it on Spotify, depending on your app of choice. You can post it there too. We do make our way around the interwebs. We read all of those comments. We do our best to internalize the ones that make sense. So we would encourage you to keep it coming. Shout out to our friends on Reddit, by the way.
On Reddit? We have friends on Reddit?
We got a huge contingent of verballers out there on Reddit promoting the verbal, promoting independent voices in a way that the college football playoff would not. We appreciate you. We love you. Thank you, Redditors. Truly, they have the ability to impact this whole operation more than anybody because of the kind words, because of putting our name out there in front of people who aren't familiar with the Solid Verbal.
That's true.
We're a big independent show. We've done well for ourselves here, but we always want to try and grow the footprint. And to our friends out there posting on our behalf and saying nice things about us, just know that we see you, we appreciate it, and you really do have a chance to make a big impact on what we do here this coming season. So thank you.
So if you're not on Reddit, what would be the next most impactful place to talk us up without seeming spammy? And is it going on the most popular videos on Pornhub and commenting underneath them?
I don't know if that would have the impact, to be honest with you. I think just telling your friends, you
got a captive audience.
Tell your friends, podcasts grow by word of mouth. That's like the main way. So just tell your peeps, your group chats, your text threads, get them in the verbal, let us know their names. Let us know your names. If you're a new listener, we're doing work here in the off season, trying to keep it as exciting as we can and interesting as we can. Hopefully this moved the needle for you, but, yeah, I don't know. Just tell the people that man. You don't got to go out there and spam with email or social media or whatever. Just
do not go on Pornhub and say something like, speaking of two excited guys,
okay.
You might want to check out Dan and Ty on the Solid Verbal.
Oh, my God. If I look at our website and I see a referrer link coming in from that web, that'll be...
Oh, man. And launches us into the stratosphere.
We did have Lex Steele on the show.
That's true.
We're Pornhub adjacent. Oh, my God. All right.
Speaking of doing weird things in a basement. Yeah.
On that note,
sorry. I'm a bad person.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrandt, weigh in. Let us know your thoughts. We always appreciate it. In the meantime, we'll talk to you a little bit later on this week. Stay solid.
Peace.